Hello, everyone. This is Jim Hawks with Gateway Pundit. Today, I'm with my friend John Strand. John, we've been reporting your story for several years now, and it just gets more bizarre every time I hear the next chapter. It's just unbelievable. But first of all, I'd like to say welcome back. You were just released
Thank
from
you.
prison, and
Yes.
I'm so happy that you're out of that nightmare situation. And
Not as happy as I am.
I bet I saw the pictures of you getting out. That's wonderful. I like to see that. Some of these other prisoners have sent us pictures like that, and I'm sure I just can't imagine what it was like to get out.
It was absolutely amazing. There's not really any other way to describe it other than that it was so beautiful and reinvigorating and gratifying. I'm very grateful to God. I'm very grateful to my amazing partner, Dr. Simone Gold, who is a warrior beyond belief. Everyone thinks they know what kind of a warrior she is, and you don't know the half of it. I'm very grateful to my parents and my entire family that have participated in the process of making me who I am, and so that I was able to meet this moment. And I'm incredibly grateful to you and all of the other fierce independent journalists and all of the patriots across the country, of all stripes and colors and professions, that have advocated for the continued pursuit of the real truth, the real story of January 6th. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, I'm glad to see you, and I'm glad you're out. And I agree with you. You know, we learn more and more every day about what the events of January 6th, and I'm totally convinced at this point that it was Pelosi's insurrection. It's very clear that she did not call in the National Guard when she should have.
Yeah, that was definitely her fault. Yeah, I've heard culpability extends past her to Mark Milley specifically and the DOD. So I think that's actually the real monster in the closet.
Well, there you go. And so there were several people involved in that, but it was planned, and they knew what would happen. And we don't know what else was being planned in the background. But certainly, if you don't have the National Guard there, you know, you wouldn't have the riots if the National Guard would have been called in and would have been there. And so,
oh yeah, right, never would have happened.
yeah, absolutely. So anyway, tell us a little bit about. Let's refresh our audience. What happened that day? And I've seen the video, but maybe you could tell our audience again just this criminal act that took place when you walked inside the U.S. Capitol.
Right. Yeah. If anyone has not yet seen the video, it's called "Do You Know What Happened on J6?" And it's a 14-minute video that replays every step I took in the Capitol over 48 minutes, compressed into a quarter of an hour. So it doesn't take long to watch. And that's available at johnstrand.com or my social, and it's worth watching. But there's so many factors to J6 that are dishonest, fraudulent, manufactured. So it takes a long amount of time to really honestly address a lot of things that were involved in that matter. So to just make it really succinct, the first thing you need to understand about J6 is what was the day itself? Why do we even talk about it to begin with? Before anything happened, why did people show up on January 6th in Washington, D.C.? No one even really thinks to answer that question. It's like, oh, it was the insurrection. Well, no, there were people there, people planning to be there weeks and weeks in advance for a specific purpose. And it definitely wasn't for an insurrection. What was it for? Well, there was an election in November of 2020 that was highly suspect and very controversial for a lot of different reasons. But whatever you're feeling about that is, half the country roughly was not comfortable with that election and wanted to ask some questions. And the last time I checked, asking questions is a sacred right we protect in this country. So January 6th was 1 million people showing up to exercise their constitutional right to ask questions. I was there on January 6th because I'm the creative director at a nonprofit organization called America's Frontline Doctors. And the founder and president was scheduled, along with many Congress people, scheduled weeks in advance to give a speech, a First Amendment protected speech, at a rally with a government approved permit right outside the Capitol. So that's why I was there. As you mentioned, the National Guard was not there, along with a total void of any semblance of legitimate crowd control and security, which of course is requisite for a crowd expected to reach 1 million people. I mean, you need National Guard if you have a crowd expected to reach over 100,000 people running around the streets. That's a lot of people. We had 10 times that many people. So I was there professionally in that capacity as an assistant to a scheduled speaker and a security person for that speaker. And then once everything devolved the way that it did, and we were swallowed up in a large crowd that pushed us inside the building, we simply tried to maintain safety and find a responsible way to get out of the building, which we did in about 48 minutes. And the video shows that journey start to finish. So that's what I was there for. That's what I did. And I'm confident that most people that were there that day were there for more or less similar intentions of exercising their First Amendment, asking questions, and hearing some important people give some speeches.
Absolutely. And while you were inside, there's video of you, Dr. Simone Gold gave a speech on hydroxychloroquine, I think it was, and COVID. Obviously, that was a hot topic at the time. You were her security. You were standing next to her when she gives this speech. And I guess that's the high crime you committed, was playing security for a very well-known individual with a huge following who, as you said, was very gutsy, and she's decided to give her speech there because it was canceled outside.
Right. So her speech was not about COVID, actually, or really medically driven at all. And it wasn't about politics or the stolen election of 2020, which was a very major legitimate concern, especially at that time, as it should be. It's still a concern. But Dr. Gold's speech was more fundamentally based on the Constitution itself and the premise of human nature and inalienable human rights. So the speech was only 5 minutes long. And at the beginning of the speech, she says, I know everyone's worried about the election, but that's not really what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to ask you, why are you here? Why'd you come to Washington, D.C. on that day? In other words, she asked the question that I brought us to ask at the beginning of this interview. I said, we have to go back to the beginning and say, what is this all about exactly? Why do we even show up here? So that's the question she asked in her speech. And she asked it for the purpose of illuminating to people that something very fundamental was in danger and under attack, which is freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, which had been under attack for the entire year of 2020, as we all understand now. So her purpose was highlighting that issue, and it coincided with a free speech assembly of 1 million Americans that were concerned about a illegitimate and fraudulently conducted election. But regardless of what the content of her speech was, we have freedom of speech that ostensibly allows you to speak about whatever you want to speak about. The topic shouldn't matter, and it certainly shouldn't be prosecutable. So yes, I was fraudulently arrested, abused intensely by an FBI SWAT team militant assault. That's a whole nother topic. But then I went through years of due process debauchery, as I call it in my upcoming book, and a lot of other just travesties that the government tortures you with bureaucratically, and other ways, psychologically and financially. And the list goes on and on. So I endured all that for years until they presented me a plea deal after fraudulently arresting me and charging me with crimes that don't even relate to the fact that I was there, not to mention that I didn't actually do anything criminal and I had no criminal intent. But they just ran past all of that and said, no, you're a criminal, and we're gonna prove it to you by purchasing that conviction. Purchasing it with power is what happened. But before they did that, though, they gave me a golden parachute. They said, we've brought a 20-year felony and 4 misdemeanors, so we have 23 years of prison and $500,000 of fines hanging over your head. And you can either walk into that buzzsaw, or you can take the golden parachute of a single misdemeanor. Just a single misdemeanor, slap on the wrist. I don't even know if I would have gone to jail, but if I did, it would have been for a week, and then go home. And that would have been 2 years ago. I'd have had my whole life back. But that plea deal, in order to get the golden parachute, I had to sign their deal, and I had to sign my name legally and morally to agree with their statement of fact about what happened on January 6th. And their statement of fact was a bucket of lies. They fabricated criminal intent out of thin air that didn't exist. So I understood that, number one, I'd be violating the 9th commandment not to bear false witness. And in addition, I would be supporting the enemy of the people in their weaponized, strategy to fabricate criminal intent, to fabricate an insurrection narrative, and I would be supporting their efforts to build that weapon and then to destroy many innocent American lives with that weapon. So absolutely no was I going to participate in that. So I rejected the plea, knowing that by rejecting it, I was walking into a guaranteed felony conviction with who knows how many years of prison. And eventually I was sentenced to almost 3 years, along with 3 years of probation. And then I actually went to prison.
It's really unbelievable.
And it got worse from there.
Yeah, it's just so unbelievable. And this is what they did to, person after person. They're still arresting people, as you know,
Yeah, 3 years
for
later.
something that happened 3.5 years ago. And at the same time, we're watching Democrats rush into the U.S. Capitol just this week.
They've been doing it for years.
Graffiti all over the nation's statues in the nation's capital. Vandalism. They're marching down the streets with Hamas flags. All of this is all great, right? They're out there. If they are arrested or held, they're out by the next day.
Right.
And they never
and we can't forget the Summer of Love. For an entire year before January 6th, our streets were chaos. Federal buildings were being firebombed and burned. I believe there were 14 or maybe even 19 different innocent people killed throughout the course. Like almost 20 people killed by BLM and Antifa chaos. Meanwhile, you know how many cops or government agents were killed on January 6th? Zero. Right. Zero cops killed on January 6th. Only people killed on January 6th in DC as a part of that protest action were 4 innocent unarmed protesters, 2 of them women, murdered in the Capitol building itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and most of America has no idea that happened. I'm glad you brought that up. So you when did they have you check into the prison then? After all this ordeal that went on for several years, and
yes, all of this craziness, I actually testified on Capitol Hill with Congressman Matt Gaetz about government weaponization and specifically J6 related issues, which was very powerful. I did that after I'd been sentenced and a few weeks before I was to self-surrender. So I self-surrendered on July 25th of 2023 with a almost 3-year sentence. And when I was sentenced on June 1st, I was sentenced on June 1st of 23. And I held a press conference and I released a statement and I made it very clear that I am innocent completely, both before God and before the rule of law as properly applied in the United States of America. And I am appealing all 5 charges, and I will not rest until all 5 have been adjudicated and I have been vindicated. And on June 28th of this year, 2024, I was vindicated at the United States Supreme Court, invalidating the felony charge, which was egregiously and absurdly misproperly applied, misapplied from a legal perspective.
1512 charge, correct?
That is the 1512 charge, which of course, as hopefully most people know by now, but we should continue to illuminate the fact that 1512 is a federal statute specifically written to plug a hole in a previous set of federal statutes that address corporate tax fraud, by and large. And it certainly has nothing to do with political activity. And in fact, when that law was signed into law by the president at the time, George Bush, he said, I want people to be very clear and careful to understand that this is not intended to be applied against political protests, which is sacredly protected by the First Amendment. So he acknowledged publicly that was an important distinction to be aware of, even though it should have just been self-evident by virtue of the law that was written and the laws that were around it. But he articulated that publicly just so that we wouldn't get it wrong. And then they got it wrong, except they didn't get it wrong. They got it right in their version of the world, in which the law simply exists as a tool for them to persecute the people that are in their way. That is the DOJ's worldview. Yeah. Right? I call the DOJ the Department of Jihad. They are on a holy war against anyone who dares to challenge them or impede their progress towards complete control. So that is not a DOJ we want in this country, but that is absolutely what we have, and I am a victim of it.
Yeah, you certainly are. I mean, you've lost years of your life, and we could go on to this and talk about this for hours. But
yeah,
the fact that these people do this, and you try to figure out what's going on in their head when they're obviously wrong. They're just committed to destroy people's lives, destroy families, destroy a person's wealth, his chance of making an income. And, they've done this over and over again. I don't, obviously there must be something in it for them, but I don't think like that. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on in their heads. I don't know how they sleep at night, but, that's where we are. You're absolutely right. You brought this up earlier. It is like a Marxist takeover in America, certainly, with the way that they're persecuting anyone who sticks their head up and questions what's going on in this country.
Right.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
it is a Marxist formulation. So when you say you don't know how they can sleep at night, I mean, I don't know how they can sleep at night either if they actually knew what's tangibly being done to people on the ground, like myself and many other J6ers who are being abused beyond belief. But as a more general matter, they think that they're right. They think that what they're doing is the correct thing. They think they are morally superior in how they view the world and how they conduct themselves. So in their worldview, the ends justify the means. And the reason they can think that way fundamentally is a Marxist premise. Marxism is obviously based on Richard Marx, an actual person, and his worldview was based on a simple concept called atheism. Marxism is simply a specific branded formulation of political theory that is founded on a atheist worldview, meaning that there is no higher power than man. Man is the ultimate consciousness and the ultimate power. So if man is the ultimate power, then power is only achievable and you can only direct it according to man. So it's the fundamental premise here is that there's no God, therefore the highest form of power is the state. The state is God. So that's how they operate, that's how they think, and that trickles down to justifying the actions that they're taking, which to us seem incomprehensible and loathsome. But that's because we believe in a higher power than the state. Right. A higher power called God, who has instituted what is right and wrong, and we are to abide by that because that is what is. That is reality.
Absolutely. Very well put. And it is shocking that Karl Marx and his doctrine and his belief system is still influencing America today and other countries, the whole Western world, when we've seen the havoc it's wreaked across, Asia and the Soviet Union and, Europe and Africa and South America. And yet people
exactly.
still and Americans should know this. But anyway, here we are. Yeah, and here's your story of a person who's been just totally abused the past few years because of these really venomous people. There was a couple of things I wanted to touch on. One was, okay, so you went into prison, and before you did, you were complaining, and we talked about this, because they wanted to send you to a prison where you didn't belong.
Correct, which is what they did.
I mean, your crime of standing in the U.S. Capitol and speaking, it's really not the same as somebody who clubs somebody over the head and kills them. And anyway, maybe you could refresh our listeners.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. There.
So, as you said, not all crimes are the same. And as I said before, when I stipulated that I am appealing all charges because I know I am innocent. And I mean that I'm innocent legally as a matter of US law. And I am for a number of reasons. So I didn't have mens rea, and anything that they accused me of didn't match up to what I actually did or what I was there for. So I didn't violate the law, period, end of story. However, as a separate matter, as a different example, Martin Luther King, for example, was also a political prisoner of conscience. Okay. He may have at times knowingly violated a city ordinance because he believed it was unjust and being applied unfairly and unequally, which invalidates it as a matter of law. But initially he has to cross that line, and we call that civil disobedience. But peaceful and intentional, thoughtful civil disobedience to highlight an injustice is a righteous act, number one. And number two, it is nothing similar to a belligerent Antifa terrorist that is running into federal buildings and burning them to the ground and attacking and assaulting cops and so forth, right? Totally separate things. So even if the law enforcement officer at the moment that an incident occurs believes that his legal responsibility is to arrest you and apply the law because you are participating in civil disobedience, so we have to at least fine you and whatnot, you expect to participate in that process if you're Martin Luther King. Now, again, like I said, I have to reiterate this one more time. I was not knowingly participating in civil disobedience. I was doing my legally authorized job to protect a well-known and scheduled in advance public speaker at a rally with a government-approved permit. So I was only following the law in my path. But be that as it may, there is a huge difference between peaceful civil disobedience on the Martin Luther King side and the belligerent, destructive, and even deadly violence routinely perpetrated by Antifa, BLM / whoever else, Hamas. They're all the same group of kids running around like idiots. So in my version, they prosecuted me with all of these things that I didn't do and that aren't even the right laws for the right subjects, and everything's a mess. But the bottom line is they're the government and they control it entirely, so they can do whatever they want and they have no accountability. So they did all that. And then we went through the process of multiple years and I was convicted and then sentenced. And at sentencing, my lawyer said, "Judge, we would like to recommend," actually the judge said, would you like the opportunity to make a request or a preference on what facility he is placed in for the incarceration? And my lawyer said, "Yes, thank you, of course." And we are requesting Pensacola because it is properly rated for his security level, or his, the class of security in the prison system is calculated. And of course, this is federal. So we're talking about the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So the BOP has very specific policy to calculate what level of security prison an inmate is qualified for. And that relates to a number of different factors. It's a roughly 50-point scale. And on roughly 0 to 50, guess where John Strand scored? 0.
0.
Yeah, my actual score was -1 because the scale goes from -3 to 45, and I was a -1. So wow. I was at the bottom 10% of the lowest security classification, which is a minimum security camp. So anything above a minimum security camp was harsh, overly oppressive, and dangerous and inappropriate for my level of specificity, for my level of history, my criminal history, which is 0, the nature of the crimes alleged against me, which are essentially political related crimes. I mean, they call it obstruction of justice, but it is still a, quote unquote, white collar crime. It is not anything violent or destructive or attacking a specific person or anything of that nature. So it was egregious for them to put me in a security level higher than what I am rated for per the BOP's own policy. And this is not just like the room is a little smaller or it's not painted the color I liked. The difference in those 4 levels of prison is substantial, but the biggest difference is definitely between level 1 and level 2. You really should think of them as level 1, and all the other levels are way, way worse. So I should have been in this not nearly as worse level, minimum security camp, where I would have had some control of my schedule and the ability to basically function as a mature working professional adult, which I am. All the other versions are very oppressive, restrictive prisons where you would expect someone to be who is a belligerent, dangerous to society and is not actually capable of doing something productive.
Right.
But they persecute J6ers, and they persecuted me specifically in this example, and violated their own policy and said, no, we're bumping them up to a level 2, approximately, prison. And it was terrible. And that was just the beginning. It got much, much worse from there, as you know.
Right. That's amazing. One thing I was going to throw in too, and that is that, and you touched on this, but Dr. Simone was supposed to give a speech that day in the same area where the protest was going on outside the U.S. Capitol. I was also supposed to speak there at a different protest. The media never likes to say that. People had the right to be there because there were several protests that were planned to be right outside of the U.S. Capitol. Of course, we never hear that in the media, but that's why a lot of people were there. And
it is the people's house. So generally speaking, they have a right to be there.
Right. The whole thing is just a nightmare. So anyway, they put you in, they decide you're going to go to this level 1, level 2 prison.
Level 2, yeah.
Despite having no history of criminal action, and we're finding, at least I'm hearing from a lot of different individuals who've been sentenced, it's the same story. They've never been to prison. This is all foreign to them. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what to expect from lawyers who are supposed to protect them,
Right.
and be on their side. A lot of the prisoners, that we're finding out didn't really have the best attorneys. And
The
anyways,
worst.
they're in this horrible situation, just like you were. And then then you check in, and when was it that you went in?
So I self-surrendered to the BOP on July 25th of 2023, and after being vindicated at the Supreme Court
A year
and
ago this week.
excellent work by my lawyers, I was able to be released on July 24th of 2024. So I was in for exactly 1 year.
Wow. That's just that's insane for speaking inside of the U.S. Capitol. It's just insane. And doing your job.
Actually, for doing my job, for doing my job as a licensed security guard, previously scheduled to attend an event at the host's invitation, who had obtained a government approved permit. And I showed up as scheduled and as expected and as duly authorized, and executed my job faithfully as a security guard and protected a woman in a crowd that became boisterous and unpredictable. And I managed to make sure that she was not injured. And I even managed to allow her to deliver her speech in the best ability that she had. It became a historic moment in the rotunda and in Statuary Hall, which now is, kind of a cool thing. But, we were hoping to actually deliver a proper speech on a stage to an audience that could hear it. And of course, that's why we and many other people were there. And we were sabotaged by our own government, which is, if you ask me, that's the real heart of the story here. J6 is, actually, I have a really interesting way to phrase it in the book that's coming out called Patriot Plea, which I hope you guys will pre-order and share with everyone in this country. I'm very excited about it. But I describe what J6 really is in historical context. But J6 on the day that it happened was a wake-up call and a moment of decision to decide, am I going to take my citizenship in this country seriously? And 1 million Americans took it seriously, and at great cost to them, showed up to participate in the American process of democracy, which is, so ironic that they're always telling us that we're a threat to democracy when we are the ones that actually participate in it on January 6th.
Right. Absolutely. So there was more to this story, though, because you get in, we've wrote about, your situation a couple times. And I think it was about the prison status that we wrote about, and we thought it was horrible what they were doing. And they may have put you in isolation. I think we reported on that also. Anyway, tell us a little bit what happened next.
So when I self-surrendered to the prison, of course, I'd never been in prison before, did not know very much about how it worked and so forth. And I knew in advance that there would be a danger of people entrapping me or enticing me one way or the other into violating rules or making mistakes, or essentially giving them an excuse in any way possible to further persecute me. So I was conscious of avoiding that and making sure that I was responsible and vigilant in being obedient according to whatever the policy is, because when you're in prison, policy is king, and the BOP is king. You're supposed to have constitutional rights, but they don't really care if you have them or not, and they certainly don't respect them. So I understood what my unalienable rights are, and I always will abide by those and understand that I have dignity in those rights being valid and existent. But I also understand the practical reality that I am in prison and I can't change that fact, and they can do whatever they want to me. So in wisdom, I was simply trying to abide by their policy as best that I could. And I did that, except for they violated their own policy. And this is always how the leftists do it. They always tell you all this stuff, and then they break the rules that they accuse you of doing and then attack you with it. It makes you dizzy, and that's the point. It's all on purpose to disorient you while they steal everything behind your back. But they violated their own BOP policy by failing to provide me with the policy rulebook. There is a BOP rulebook specific to each facility that their policy requires the inmate is given immediately. Because if you are not given the rulebook, you cannot be punished for not following rules that you don't understand or even know exist. Again,
Right.
that's fairly self-evident to normal people with common sense, but that's what they did. So a few weeks into being in prison, I made a phone call, which I thought I had done according to their policy. They told me you have to get a code from a counselor to use the phone. It took 8 days. My mother did not hear from me for 8 days after I was dumped into prison for the first time ever. My poor mother was in tears and scared to death that I was not even alive because no one could hear anything from me. So that's egregious in itself. You should be able to make at least one phone call to your mother within the first hour, and if at least within the first day of being entered into a prison. So 8 days, I finally got access to a phone that I could use. And then I was told, in order to use the phone, you must submit any phone number with a name and address for approval. The BOP must approve any name, phone number, address, etc., that you want to use to communicate with. So I complied with that because I was told that rule verbally. And I loaded in those phone numbers, and my phone numbers were approved. And then I made a phone call to a friend of mine who's a journalist. And I mean, I work as a journalist, so this is all normal. It's part of my life. It's what I do. And I applied it properly according to the BOP rules as I was told them. And I made a phone call to that journalist, and that journalist added on I had a producer for my news show, Frontline Flash. So I had a Frontline Flash producer along with Grant Stitchfield on Real America's Voice so that they could talk to me directly about my experience. And I was also told verbally that I should be very careful about divulging specific prison-related information that might pose a security risk to the facility and to the staff, which seemed, again, very common sense to me. So I said, absolutely, I would be very careful about that. So when I had the phone call, I was, Grant asked me the question because it's an obvious question that any journalist would want to ask. What's the prison like? How's your experience? Et cetera, et cetera. And I simply said, out of respect to the BOP and their request that I be very careful about security information, all I'm going to say is that I'm safe. The staff is professional. That part of it is fine. And I'm not going to expound on any of that information. I'm just going to talk about my civil rights and my constitutional concerns and the appeal that I'm still working on and the abuse of government and the weaponization of government and those things. And that was what the interview was. So I abided by every rule that they informed me of. And then a day after that phone call, I was whisked away into a interrogation room, like out of a movie scene. It was quite unbelievable and it was the most intense thing I've ever experienced in my life to that point. And I was grilled about all of this. And I was told I had violated all these different, you should have heard you're gonna have to read the book to get all the details of that interrogation, but they were accusing me of additional criminal activity. They were accusing me of trying to incite violence and terrorism. They were accusing me of supporting other criminals in the jail there with me. It was just obscene. It was bonkers crazy.
Right.
And I'm just sitting there thinking, how can they just make all of this stuff up out of thin air? I'm already in prison. What more do you want from me? How much more do you want to bludgeon me with this crap? Like, I didn't do anything wrong. I called a journalist who's a friend of mine that I asked your permission for his phone number to be loaded in, and you approved it. Are you kidding me? So they got me on this technicality that you can't have two people on the phone at the same time. And I said, well, that doesn't even make any sense to me, but if that's your rule, that's your rule, except you never told me that rule. You told me to get approval for my phone contacts, and both of those people were previously approved. So what's wrong here? They're like, well, if you read the rule book, you would have known that. And I said, wait, rule book? That was the first time rule book had ever been uttered. No one had ever said the word rule book. No one had handed me a sheet of paper about a rule book. I knew nothing about a rule book until that moment when he said, we're about to punish you for breaking the rules and you should have known better because we gave you a rule book. I said, I've never even heard of a rule book. He definitely didn't give it to me.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah, quickly.
It's not just that you didn't have the rules and you didn't follow the rules. Your case manager, this was an inappropriate punishment for me to interview. Your case manager said your punishment would have been loss of phone for 30 days.
Okay.
That's
Yes. Do you want someone to jump in with you?
No. It just an additional aspect of what happened. They accused me of something that I couldn't have known not to do. because they violated their policy by not giving me the rule book in advance so that I would have awareness of the rule.
Right.
So that's the first thing, and that's huge. But also, if you did legitimately break a rule that you shouldn't have, the rule that you break has to be matched with a punishment that's appropriate. Again, this is just common sense that we understand generally, right? And
that's life, isn't it? Yeah. That's how life's supposed
right.
to work.
And it's life, but it's also specific BOP policy.
Uh-huh.
So the BOP violated their own policy by not giving me the rule book so that I could know about the rules. And then when they accused me of that anyway and just forgot, you just pretended that they had, actually they probably fraudulently wrote in after the fact, oh, we gave them the rule book. It's a lie. They definitely didn't give me the rule book. They didn't even mention it. I didn't even know it existed. But then after they fast forwarded past that, they said, you broke this rule and we're going to punish you for it. But the rule that I broke, making an inappropriate phone, a technicality about the phone call, would have, the BOP policy stipulates that I should have lost my phone privileges for a week or a month. Not that I would be abused harshly with weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of isolation, which equates to torture when I get to explaining that part. So they violated their own policy, and then they punished excessively in violation of their own policy.
Right.
So really the greater point is the policy is nothing more than the Constitution is generally in the country. It's a document that we all point to and they hide behind, but it doesn't have anything to do with how the government actually behaves. Nothing.
Yeah.
All it does is give them an excuse to say, you shut up because I'm in control, I'm the government.
Yeah. Sounds absolutely horrible. What a nightmare.
It was a nightmare. And so they punished me excessively for that. And then they did that for a couple of weeks. Then they pulled me out because of the Gateway Pundit story, reporting on the fact that I was being abused, which I was.
When was this? Do you remember what time that was? Because
I was first put into isolation at the end of August. So I'm guessing it was probably mid-September of 23 when the story came out about my isolation and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the word torture was used. Now, sometimes when people say torture, they think of someone being strung up on a medieval wooden rack and stretched and having their fingernails peeled off, right? So that kind of torture was not happening. But torture more generally is a word that means extended and intense duress.
Torture, let's just make it easier, Jim. Torture by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, anything over 14 days in isolation is torture by their definition. Okay, so it's very, very simple.
We got to that point.
But you got to be faster.
I'm not fast enough.
And then Mr. Beast, their social media influencer, is 226 million people on YouTube. When John was in prison, happened to do a social experiment, coincidentally, right when John was in isolation. And in this social experiment, he offered somebody $10,000 a day to stay in isolation. His isolation was this huge supermarket that had everything you could imagine. The guy had total freedom to walk around in the supermarket. They gave him a productive job. They gave him $10,000 a day to do it. He could talk to people, but he just couldn't have his friends and he couldn't have purposeful work, right? The guy said, oh, I'll do it. He picked a random guy from YouTube. And the guy's like, I could last for years, right? Okay, he lasted 45 days. It's that bad. The concept of isolation. So there you go, torture. Next question, because we have like 10 minutes.
Okay.
Right. So then we reported this. I know that this is spread around the internet some, but something else happened, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene retweeted the Gateway Pundit story reporting on John Strand being abused and even tortured, certainly in a psychological and Amnesty International sense. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, God bless her soul, she's a fighter and we love her. And she brought this to the attention of the American people. And millions of people saw the story, at which point they dragged me out of the hole and dragged me into an interrogation room again and grilled me much more intensely and said, this story is claiming that the BOP is torturing you. We're not torturing you. How dare you tell people that you're being tortured? Meanwhile, I've been in prison the whole time. I haven't told anyone anything. They blocked me from the phone. They blocked me from the email. They blocked my lawyers from reaching me, which is an egregious legal violation. Absolutely unacceptable. Period. End of story. You are never allowed to withhold someone from access from their lawyer. Ever. This is the United States of America, or it's supposed to be. Not ever do you block anyone from access to their attorney, period.
So this didn't even come from you. It came from sources who knew
Right.
you.
I was in prison being abused this entire time, including when the torture story went out. So I had nothing to do with it.
Right.
But because they were furious that a sitting congresswoman would dare to report on a news story, I was retaliated against, thrown back into isolation with even higher levels of aggression and abuse, and kept there for almost in total, it was 4 full months of abusive isolation where I hardly saw even the sky for more than maybe 2 to 3 hours a week. And I was still, I never left the building. I hardly saw the sky. I had to go 72 hours at a time without showering, which is actually more miserable than it sounds in the disgusting environment that I was in. I could hardly ever sleep because my skin was crawling. I was in the worst isolation hole in the entire BOP. Every BOP has an isolation hole, but the Miami FCI isolation hole is known to be one of the absolute worst. It is full of these, it's like the darkest corners of hell, where there is a cacophony of screaming and yelling and demonic laughter that almost never stops. It is,
oh my God.
It is hard to actually describe, but trust me, it is the closest thing that you can physically experience in the world that I'm aware of that feels like you're in hell. No one's actually beating you up, but you are locked in a, 10 or 15 foot concrete cube that you can't see or feel anything outside of it, but the walls themselves hate you. You're in a box that hates you and you can't escape it. And you're filled with all of this horrific noise. I hyperventilated at one point because I just couldn't process all of that ruckus that would never stop. It makes you want to just go lights out, but there's no way to turn the lights out. It's not possible.
Oh my God.
If that's not torture, I don't know what is.
And this is all day and night that this is happening.
I mean, at night they turn the lights off, and the inmates, some of these inmates have been in there for a year.
Oh my God.
Now, many of them simply go in for a month, they get out, and then they violate a rule and they go right back in. So most of the people in there, criminality and belligerent, abusive, violent behavior is just how they exist. That is it's very animalistic, basically, but that's how they're treated. The guards are, by and large, they're terrible. Their attitudes are horrific. They view all inmates, and they viewed me just the same as they did the animalistic inmates that were belligerent. They viewed me the same. They viewed me as a piece of garbage. They treated me as a piece of garbage. And when you treat someone over time as garbage, they become garbage. So, but to answer your question, at night, the inmates were exhausted. The lights turned out. They fell asleep out of pure exhaustion. I still couldn't sleep because my skin was crawling because they wouldn't let me bathe. But at 6 o'clock in the morning, when the lights come on and breakfast happens, they're awake, and then they start screaming and yelling again.
Oh
So yeah, you really can't get away from it. It is horrific. It's absolutely demonic, to be honest.
Oh my God. My heart goes out to you. That's just awful. And that lasted in for several months. Until when?
4 months I couldn't get out. And the entire 4 months, I had no idea why I was there, other than them saying the thing about the phone, but that was just ridiculous. And I explained that. It's like, that was your fault. You broke your own policy. I couldn't have known any better. And I'm following every rule that you give me. And I proved that I've done that. And you know I'm here as a political prisoner of conscience. You know that I'm here because I wouldn't bend the knee to a tyrannical government and accept a fraudulent plea deal. You know I am here because I always do the right thing. So if you tell me what the right thing is, I will do it. But if you don't tell me, and then you persecute me for doing the wrong thing because you broke your own rule to hide the rules, you are the evil person, not me. But I explained that to them, and I did it politely. I was never belligerent or angry with them. I was calm, cool, collected, precise, accurate, and consistent. And I explained it over and over and over again. And there was one gentleman in the BOP, particularly at Miami, who was kind and reasonable. And he actually told me off the line that, this was like, you can't tell anyone this, but I'm actually a big fan of yours. I love your podcasts,
Right.
which I thought was awesome. But aside from that, whether he liked my political opinions or not, he treated me as a human being. And he understood that I was trying to follow the rules and they were playing games with me. But he was too low on the totem pole to make any difference. The BOP is a giant bureaucratic machine and it does what it's going to do. So he had no real power.
Right.
So I explained it to many, many different people, and they just, they made a bunch of excuses, or they passed the buck to some other guy, or they said, the policy says this, the policy says this.
Right.
And 4 months later, I still had no idea why I was really there. I had no idea. The worst thing about being in a terrible situation is not having any idea when it's going to end.
Oh, God.
So if you know going in, like, you're going to be tortured for 4 months and it's going to be absolutely hellacious, but just get through 4 months and then you're good.
Right.
It's still gonna suck. It's going to be awful.
Yeah.
But it's much different if they don't even tell you anything. They just throw you in a hole of hell and you are being abused and you keep begging for help or answers or for mercy, and you just get ignored or continued abuse, and it just goes on day after day after day after day, and you have no idea why or when it will end. That is the worst part.
Absolutely. I wanted to bring up another report that we put up, and that was that Matt Gaetz in November of 23, he questioned the director of the Bureau of Prisons,
Paulette Peters, yes.
And he asked her about, and your name got brought up again. This was in November of last year, and about the stories he heard that they were abusing January 6th prisoners. And did that cause you any more pain, or were you just already going through? You're about they're already punishing you enough.
They were brutalizing me by that point. So, but Congressman Gaetz had become aware of how badly they were abusing me, which is why he brought my name up and made it a point.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was an egregious abuse, and it was a serious issue and a violation that he was very aware of and concerned about. So that's why he articulated it specifically. I wasn't aware of that happening at the time, although I did hear a rumor from a prison guard a few days later that, dude, you are causing some serious waves because they are talking about your name in Congress right now, and they grilled the director of the BOP herself.
Uh-huh.
Which of course I found very interesting.
But let me ask you this: so she gets grilled in Congress. Did anything change for you after?
Oh no, absolutely not. Not in the slightest. And then I would learn after the fact that Congressman Gaetz held her to it and said, "I'm coming to actually see how he is and verify that he's alive and safe." And they whisked me away in the middle of the night. I don't know if they generally do this, but it doesn't seem like you would generally wake someone up out of a dead sleep at like 2 or 3 in the morning. I'm not talking 6 in the morning. I'm talking like 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. Dead of night. Inmates had just fallen asleep, and suddenly a flashlight shines in and they bang the door and they say, "Strand, expletive, get up and get out of here." And they whisked me into a van, threw me on a plane, and put me through 12 hours of transit hell like you can't believe. I described that in the book as well.
And just to be clear, that was days before Gaetz had an appointment.
Just days before he was
to show up at the prison, and bless his heart, he went anyway and gave him a bit of grief. But he was hopping angry,
furious.
He's like, how do you disrespect me? I had an appointment.
And wow, so did he know that they had moved you?
No, he came to the prison expecting to see me because he had set up an appointment for that purpose.
To be fair, just so Jim Hoff has accurately, he found out because I told him. But he then shows up and is like, "I'm here to do my appointment." They literally never told him.
Oh my gosh. A U.S. congressman. They just don't care. They really
absolutely don't care about anything.
Yeah. So they moved you to a different location. Did they ever move you back, or did you stay there then for the rest of your time?
No, they got me out of there thanks to Congressman Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Clay Higgins and Paul Gosar, who were fierce, and thanks to Dr. Gold, as I mentioned. But it's true. Only because of those patriots and their tenacity and their integrity was I removed. I could have still been in isolation now, honestly. I mean, what was to stop them? They were having lots of fun abusing the crap out of me. Yeah. So thanks to those patriots.
By the way, yours wasn't an isolated incident. There's several January 6ers who I talked to, and they're being punished today in isolation. So it's a horrible thing. It
is horrific. I can attest personally. I can guarantee you that those kind of circumstances are horrific. They are so inhumane. I wouldn't treat an actual violent criminal that way.
Yeah.
Because they're still human.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact that we're doing this to patriots who actually participated in democracy and want to uphold the real rule of law, that is vile.
Absolutely. Well put. So you stayed then for the remainder of your time. You just got out this past week. Anything you want to add to this story? And this, has the nightmare ended, or is it?
No. We are still completely in the middle of the nightmare. There's no way the nightmare has ended because there are hundreds of J6 hostages still being abused and held against their will as innocent citizens who, like I said, they are the real heroes of the story, and they are being punished not only as the villains, but being punished as we should not punish anyone. It's disgusting. So we are still in a nightmare, but it is our duty as American citizens, anyone that can hear my voice, to understand that this is existential, it is urgent, and it is egregious. And all of us have a sworn duty to our country and our countrymen to speak up, to stand up, to say enough is enough, and to participate in the process. Many ways in which you can do that, but it's really your job as a citizen to research and learn how you can make a difference. That is your job. So it's not my job to inform you how to do it. It's your job to look it up and figure it out and get it done. But we have to get it done together, and we have to get it done now. And part of that is definitely getting President Trump elected for a third time. So make sure we do that and pay attention to early voting, because the Democrats always beat us in early voting in September, and then we need to vote President Trump in on November 3rd.
Absolutely.
No, excuse me, November 5th. Remember the 5th of November.
Right. Absolutely. But John, I want to commend you for the courage you've had, and I really respect you for doing what was true to your heart. You didn't back down. You always did what you thought was right, and you really set a great example for a lot of Americans. We all need to remember that, because this is an isolated incident with you. It's happened to a lot of people, but I'm so glad to see that you're out, and I hope things turn around quickly for you. And please keep in touch and let us know how things are going. But thank you for this, what you've done for this country, and standing true to yourself. And we wish you the best of luck. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate the time, and God bless America.
Amen.